Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. Today we're going to remove the first honey for harvest this year. Not very much, a few deep supers and a couple of shallow ones that we prepared the other day, and they should be ready to go. So what we're going to do, we brought our wagon. What we have set up at the moment is the bees are, the super of honey is above a bee escape, so the bees can go down into the rest of the hive and not come back up. This was set up yesterday, should be long enough for these bees to have vacated that super. So we've got one deep there, we've got one medium super here above the bee escape, we've got two deep supers here above the bee escape, and we've got one deep super here above the bee escape. So these are all the ones that we're going to harvest. So we will get started. So, gentlemen, we'll start with this one here. Take the top off, and each of these supers are going to be fairly heavy. Mediums should be manageable by one person, but the deeps are more than one. And it hasn't worked that brilliantly well yet. It has only been about 20 hours, but have to remember, if there's any brood in some of these, they stay behind. We tried to scrape out the brood, but there's possibly the odd bit of brood. There's not too many bees in here. Well, let's take the supers off anyway, and we'll just let the bees out the window in the barn. You'll probably need the hive tool because it's still going to be pretty stuck. We might scrap it if it's not quite ready, so the bees should make their way through the bee escape. Right, so if you pop that off and put the normal cover on, we have to tap the bees off it. And again, yep. Okay, and put the cover back on, and higher number of bees will get to work on these boxes now. Okay, and we can move on to the next box here. See how well they've come out of this super. Still a few bees. Not bad.
Still a few, but you want to take it?
Yep. Now, typically 24 to 48 hours is what the bees need to vacate. Also, it works much better when there is a honey flow on than when there isn't a honey flow on, because what that does is it causes the bees to be cycling through the hive. Now, so a couple of days ago, we were out here removing some honey, and the camera stopped working. Our memory was full. So I'm starting again to some extent. We'd set up some of the supers with bee escapes on them, and we took a couple of them off. But right now we've still got a few left on here. And just to remind you how a bee escape works, a bee escape is like a one-way door on the hive, where the bees can go through the board this way, but they can't figure out how to go back that way. So in theory, this having been on here for 3 days now, the bees should be out of these boxes and just in here. So let's see what I can find. Of course, now that I don't have help, I've got to deal with these heavy boxes on my own. This is the way they should work, with no bees up here at all, just the odd one starting to fly in here right now. So I will take them off, try and get them over to the wagon. Okay, and we have one more here that has the bee escape on. Works like a charm. You leave it long enough. There's maybe half a dozen bees in here. That's no big issue. Oh, they're heavy. So a bee escape can work. Really, really well. It's a great labor-saving device as long as you've got the time and you're not in a hurry to get the honey off, because it takes 1, 2, 3 days to get the bees out of the super. But sometimes you are in a hurry and you have to travel to a yard and you want to arrive there, decide to take the super off and take it off there and then. So you can just take the frames out and brush them with the bee brush. And of course that's going to end up with a lot of ticked off bees, and you end up having the bees jumping back on those frames as soon as you brush the bees off. So there's another thing that you can do. It's called using a fume board. And a fume board is using a bee repellent to drive the bees down the hive. And that can work extremely well. So I'm going to look around to see if there's any hives here right now that are ready to have some honey taken off, and I'll show you how the fume board works. So here's an example of a deep super full of, mostly full of honey, but it's also full of bees. So I'm going to demonstrate how we get the bees out of this hive using a fume board. fume board is basically a box which has usually plastic on the top, but you can make these yourself. But basically what it does is it uses a repellent which the bees find bad smelling, and it doesn't require much. Takes a few drops around it, scattered around, and depending on the repellent you use, some of them smell really bad to us as well, and some smell just very bad to the bees. Some of them require warm temperatures for it to work very well. So these bee repellents do tend to work really well when the temperature is about 80 degrees, 90 degrees, so because it makes the volatile substances in there really move about and get in the air, and it drives the bees away. So this is one called Bee Go, but I've got a number of them that I've used. So I'm just going to simply take this fume board and put it over the top of the hive. Now, what's going to happen? The sun is warming this side of the fume board. So as the sun warms it up, it also heats up the liquid and makes those fumes. It's going to now make those fumes drop down into the hive and start driving the bees further and further down. And depending on the effectiveness and the temperature, you can be driving bees down 2 or 3 supers if you're not careful. So you don't want to overdo it. You want to monitor what you're doing. It can take as little as 2 to 3 minutes to get the bees out of a super. It might take 10 to 15 minutes. Just depends on the temperature and the particular product that you're using. So just keep an eye on it. If used right, you don't really upset the bees for very long. I was saying before, while we're waiting for this to happen, I was seeing signs that we still had a honey flow on. We have plenty of activity in the yard, but I'm also seeing this. When you start to see bees bearding during the daytime in the yard, it means that you have enough bees in the hive that have not been told about a nectar source, that they're starting to cluster on the outside. And they're staying on the outside just to provide plenty of room for airflow in the hive. We've got a lot of fanning going on there, so they are curing the nectar that they've got. But bees clustered on the front of the hive is usually a sign that the nectar flow is coming to an end or has come to an end. Having said that though, that is the only hive in the yard that is showing that activity. So let's stay optimistic. Now, it's been on for a minute or two. See what's happening. Bees are moving down very rapidly. You can hear the noise. That's the bees fanning the substance that they really don't like in there. So the bees are retreating very quickly. Now if you use this for too much or too long, we're going to start to see them coming out the entrance of the hive. But we've got 3 supers above them, so we should be good. Just for now, I'm leaving that super that was above them, which had plenty of space in it, just there, and we'll put it on to replace these bees, this super, when I take it off. In the meantime, if we do have a flow on, that to some extent on the clover, certainly see bees on the clover, and what's more is when they're on the flower, they're staying on the flower. They're putting their faces in that flower and sucking up nectar. So each of these flowers is providing them with plenty of nectar to keep them on an individual flower for a fair while. So that's a sign that there is another sign that there is a flow on. And I can see bees on quite a few of these clover heads. Pretty soon the goldenrod will come out. These first species of goldenrod that come out tend not to produce much nectar. So the first species that come out don't tend to produce much nectar. It's the species that bloom quite a bit later in the season. It's probably ones like this that tend to produce the nectar that gives us a honey flow, but that can vary. See, the goldenrod is made up of many different species, and hopefully we will get a honey flow from more than one of the species of goldenrod this year. Yeah, let's see how these girls are doing now. I would say that is pretty clear. That super is pretty darn clear of bees, and in fact we've driven them out of most of the super below them too, so it's worked pretty well. Let's just see how far down they went. Yeah, they're there. We still have some bees here. I'm not taking this super off because I've got some brood in this super. But most of the bees are considerably further down. So that's the fume board has worked very well. Take this super away before too many bees find it. Another sign that the honey flow is coming to an end. Bees are starting to go to the supers I'm leaving unprotected. If you've got a good honey flow on, you can have a super of honey out and the bees will, other colonies will ignore it. Once they start getting short of nectar, they start looking for shortcuts, and robbing becomes a very viable option for them. Let's have a look in this hive. We have 3 supers here, and I think a couple of them have a fair amount of honey in. Let's just have a look. Pretty full of honey, very full of bees. So now that super that's full of honey is at the top. Put the fume board on. Now this is not in the sun, so it may not work as quickly. Having said that, it's only a medium super as opposed to a deep super, so it should work pretty well. In the meantime, let's have a look. Just to get an idea of how quickly it's working. That super was really full of bees. They're already going down really fast. So I can see quite a few robbers there. Unless I move that super out pretty fast, it's going to be absolutely covered with bees. So This will be the only other one that I take off right now. The other options, of course, is to cover those supers with a towel, but I don't have that many supers that are ready to come off right now. A few bees in there, nearly out. As I say, the different so this is called a fume board and a bee repellent. So you get the two together. The fume board typically costs about $20. The repellent costs roughly that as well. And it works extremely well to remove bees very quickly from a super, provided it's warm. When you're doing this in the fall, this can take, if you leave it on a day which is down to 60 degrees, 65 degrees, you might be waiting all day. Some repellents work very well in the cool, some do not. Okay, I think that's going to be ready to take off now. So the fume board, good way to get bees out of the honey super, but I think I prefer the escape boards generally, but if you have to travel to get your honey out of the hives, the fume board is the way to go. So we have ourselves a bit of a honey crop. So time to get this into the barn and start doing some extracting before the girls come and take it all back. So now we've got some honey, time to take it in the barn to do some extracting. More of that in another video. I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. See you next time.